Hey everyone, Jenna here. I want to share just a very short discussion about surrender and about surrender versus being passive in light of the last video that I shared, which was about a lot of the spiritual consciousness control programs that have been taught to humans and specifically humans that are awakening. I I talked about the idea of programming related to being passive and related to not doing anything to eliminate evil or counter it. And I just recorded that last video. So if you didn't see it, go to that one. If you're finding this one, that one is about spiritual influencers, the cult of Baal, Anunnaki control programs. And after I finished that recording, I started thinking about a specific teaching of Jesus's that I think has been misinterpreted that I want to speak to. Again, there have been so many ways that ancient wisdom teachings have been able to get misinterpreted, be mistranslated sometimes, or in some cases, like the active cult of Baal, which took over the Christian church in some ways, certain sects of it started twisting the words, So we also have to, again, kind of use our discernment around some of these ancient teachings. Now, I do think a lot of what is contained in the Gospels related to Jesus's words are mostly true, and there's also been a lot left out. So we also are getting teachings out of context sometimes, and that's important. I think if we're going to go to things like the Bible, we have to be very willing to recognize there's a lot of information in there that's out of context. There's a lot of ancient history information in there that's not been interpreted correctly. There's a lot about the Anunnaki gods in there. So the God that is abusive and that humans feel like they need to pacify, yeah, that's an Anunnaki negative God. Like that's the Baal cult god, that they're like worshiping. So we have a lot of mixed information in the Bible that we have to be very willing to reintegrate, in our consciousness to know that there's a lot of good in there. There's a lot of beautiful teachings of Jesus. There's a lot of remembrance of miracles, but then there's also a lot that hasn't always been interpreted correctly or that has lived on in ways that doesn't evolve with us. And so anytime our spiritual teachings also get very static and like rigid, that's not in alignment with source because we're always evolving and it's important that our consciousness is allowed to evolve. So there's a specific, I think, phrase in there. I'm not like referencing a Bible here. This is just kind of from memory. So forgive me if I misspeak on any particular here about that quote, but there's a part in the Bible where Jesus talks about like allowing your enemy to do what they're going to do, right? Surrendering, like just allowing it, not fighting it, not engaging in the conflict. And and this has become a teaching of being passive. This has become a teaching of allowing abuse, okay? And that's not okay. And what I want to speak to here is the spiritual mechanic of surrender. Because what was, I think, being attempted there was a teaching about surrender, but it did not get like a closed loop teaching. So, and also back then, like the language that was being used, it's like, like people like it was so hard. It's like so hard, to like deliver what can now be delivered in these like more holistic full spectrum teachings. Back then it was so much more difficult to, I think, for someone like Jesus to get these sorts of points across. So there's a difference between just being passive and surrendering, okay, from a consciousness standpoint, from like a bodily quantum mechanics standpoint. So so the mechanics around surrendering is about finding a place of non-duality. So again, there's been like all these misinterpreted teachings around non-duality, and one can utilize non-dual states, surrendered states to command on creation. So, I just got chills. So, what Jesus was talking about is not just allowing the enemy to like do anything at all costs, right? But finding in ourselves a place of surrender so that when we command on the creation, the universe, the earth matrix, the enemy, whatever, that command can pierce through the programming that's in place and allow for like a rapid transformation to occur. So surrender is about rapid transformation. Surrender is about not controlling. Surrender is about not being in conflict with the opposing force. And this is like a kind of like a samurai, teaching too. Like a lot of the Far East masters are very good at this concept of recognizing that part of our consciousness work is to eliminate fear, get out of a place of being in this like entangled conflict with the enemy where we are feeling, like all of this like internal, chaos and anger and fear and that sort of stuff. Like when that's present, that's not always our most powerful place of alignment and precision in taking action, in manifesting, creating, commanding. So the samurai culture in the Far East really understands the mechanics of polarity, and they understand the mechanics of like duality, right? And how to both transcend on a conscious level the like duality conflict where you are really feeling this need, to engage in conflict and battle versus being so surrendered and at peace in yourself that you're very much like untriggered by the enemy, untriggered by the evil. And in that untriggered, surrendered place, that's where consciousness can operate in a precision state. And that's when divine intelligence, source intelligence, can also come in and override a situation. Okay? I just got chills again. So there is this very real experience of being able to practice non-duality. That doesn't mean that you're always in a place of non-duality, right? Like we are inherently like having this engagement between light and shadow. Like that is a natural thing in the universe. That will always be a natural thing. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Like shadow just hides the light. Shadow just prevents us from seeing the full spectrum of what we can see and experience and create. And yet on earth, the shadow has just like, become so evil that like we have a different type of situation with our shadow engagement. And part of that shadow engagement is reaching a place of not having fear in regards to the evil. It's like we can still know we need to be in a precision state of eliminating it and rising in our sovereignty and taking those spiritual actions and operating in the most balanced, centered way. But that is its own path of like mastery. That is its own path of utilizing surrender and non-duality to operate absolute highest consciousness for the purpose of either allowing a miracle or eliminating evil or an opponent in a very precise, non-conflict oriented way, in an unemotional way, essentially, and allowing the surrender to be what lets our higher intelligence guide us to the absolute highest outcome. So there's a way in which surrender can be utilized as a spiritual mechanic. There's a way in which surrender is very much a part of our understanding of commanding on the darkness, commanding the light to take hold and to come into form. But yet we can't have this like really entangled conflict with the negativity and the evil. Because a lot of times what's happening is that we are feeling disempowered, angered, whatever in regards to the evil. And human emotions are natural. Like if you feel anger, you're going to feel anger and you need to get it out of your system. Like I'm not saying anger is something we should avoid. It's like we need to be able to feel and process what we're feeling and then also do like the deeper level spiritual healing to say, okay, like now let me see the big picture as to why I was feeling fear towards this person, why I was feeling anger. And once we get that processed and moved in a healthy way, like that's also part of the surrender. Like, okay, now I can surrender to what is. I can accept what is, but also not stay passive, right? About like what's the highest plan and what is actually going to bring heaven to earth. So we have to be able to kind of practice this dance, between feeling internal conflict about what's going on the planet, about like all of the ways we, personally have been like subjugated, disempowered, whatever, and heal, inside of ourselves from that. But also like allowing the mechanic of surrendering, to a higher power, surrendering to source intelligence, help move us in the most precise, aligned, high level way that prevents chaos, because also what the samurais and the Far East masters know is that, when we still have a lot of those internal feelings, of that are chaotic, and negative towards something that is like an enemy or opponent or evil, we're going to invite the chaos, right? Like we are going to operate in a more chaotic state. We're not going to operate as precision laser focused as we need to. So I want to address this idea of surrender versus being passive, because also like in the Far East, the Kung Fu samurai masters know about like the redirection of energy as well, right? It's like not about like meeting an opposing force with all this force. It's like there's actually a higher operating system that can take over to eliminate the evil. So I think that's important for us to understand too, that like that teaching about Jesus, number one, or the teaching from Jesus about surrender, number one, is not about just staying purely passive. Number two, we want to meet opposing force, evil, with the ability to redirect that force back to source. We want to operate in the most precise flow state that allows the elimination of that evil without extreme chaos surrounding it. And anytime we're feeling a lot of internal conflict about something, that tells us, there's something inside of us that needs to heal, or a spiritual action, that needs to be taken to help us rise in that power, to help us, take that internal conflict and transmute it somehow into something creative, something productive, something constructive, something that gets that out of us and then allows us to operate from a more fully surrendered place, but with the precision laser focus of what is possible on a higher level. And so I want to again just name how there's a lot of ways our ancient spiritual teachings have at times been utilized to prevent us from operating as samurais when we need to, and to prevent us from understanding the deeper spiritual mechanic that's going on, because there is a very real mechanic there regarding duality, regarding, the positivity and the negativity, and finding the center zero point, the 0 point of balance, where then you literally have transcended it, but then you can command on it. So it's not about transcending and then doing nothing. It's about transcending and then operating in such a laser precision focus that the evil just stands no chance. So that's like what we're really wanting to get at when we think about non-duality transcendence. It's a tool in our tool belt, right? Like it's a tool in our consciousness to say our consciousness now can subjugate the evil, because we're no longer subjugated to the evil. We're no longer entangled with the evil in this like chaotic, conflicting sort of way. We're able to just simply like command its existence to stop, or redirect that energy in certain ways that are clever, are intelligent, are more creative than what the evil can do. Because ultimately the evil does have a limit to their creativity. Like they do have a limit to like their genius, because they're not of pure light. They're not of source genius. They're entities. And so it's important to really understand too what allows our like highest source genius to fully come online through us. And that's also sometimes what that state of surrender is about. It's about just finding that 0 point where we can allow the highest consciousness to move through us, and we can also operate in a precise way that doesn't create chaos. So that's something, I've been practicing. That's something I've been learning about on this journey. That's something I have been unpacking, because there have been a lot of these like spiritual mechanic types of teachings that I've needed to really practice in my body, and really practice in my life, and really start to better understand like what was the real intent there, and then also like how does that work in real life. Like in real life as a human in these situations, how does that work? Like how do you both eliminate evil and surrender at the same time? Like how do you like like not be in conflict internally, in these like big ways that then keep you from seeing the full truth. Like that's also an aspect of how the cult of Baal, is also operated, as like keep humans in this like state of internal conflict as much as possible, so that they're not able to rise into that higher consciousness, or so that higher consciousness can't move through them as effectively. Because when we're in fear, when we're in a lot of conflict, that does prevent our ability to like operate from our like, highest prefrontal cortex, consciousness. And so even though in the last video I was talking about like eliminating the evil and like taking action against that, I'm also talking about that in a way that's like really not conflict oriented, that is really just like precise, and is like naming what needs to not exist anymore, naming what the crimes are, naming what level of consciousness is not able to be rehabilitated, and what level of predator consciousness should not be allowed, to live on earth. But then taking that action in an aligned, precise, non-conflict oriented way. And that's how the samurais operate. Like a samurai is able to eliminate an opponent, evil, whatever, but in this like, mostly not unemotional place. And so again, it's not like all human emotion is bad or anything. Like we need to feel it. We need to feel it. If we feel emotion, great. That means we're alive. That means we're processing, and we're rewiring our system by feeling and by allowing that to pass through our system. And that's also why, like to reference another Jesus example, that's another reason why we see Jesus get emotional, because that emotion has to pass through the system to then get to the place of surrender and 0 point focus, right? So it's like you can't keep that all bottled in, and you also don't want to deny it. Like you're even if you're operating in a place of like mostly non-dual consciousness, you're still a human in this experience that has been very polarized, And you're also wired to feel, you're wired to feel injustice. You're wired to feel, the negativity, right? Like that's a good thing. It helps us know what's present. And so there were a lot of instances that like where before Jesus performed a miracle, like he had to like move emotion. Oh my God, I'm getting emotional. He had to move emotion through his system to like be able to then come back to that place of surrender so that source could move through him. Like that's how it works. And we have forgotten that. And like we have misinterpreted, some of these past teachings for something else. And I think it's just important that like that is shared and that is known, because source intelligence is so much more intelligent than evil ever will be. And we need to know how to let it through us. And we need to know that there's a difference between that kind of surrender and just being passive and ignoring situations and not taking action. And the most beautiful thing that we can do is allow like true source, intelligence to move through us and as us. And we can ask for that and we can allow it and we can affirm that that is our intention, to be vessels for that highest consciousness, to be vessels, through which like source miracles and transformation can happen. But it requires us to feel, it requires us to surrender to feeling too. Like that's part of it, like feeling is surrender. Like shoving it down and like suppressing it is not surrender. And so I think we've not always understood like what these things are about, and like and when they were originally given to humanity, humans were too far from, Jesus's consciousness to like get it back then, and it's taken us 2000 years to like unpack that. And like that's been a big part of my journey, is like better dissecting, those sorts of things after moving through a lot of the consciousness mechanics training I've gone through shamanism and yogic study, and my own, discernment, and my own like ceremonial processes to open to source and to say like, show me how this works, show me what is true, show me how to like be a vessel for healing, like show me how your miracles work, because I want to know. And oh, I'm getting emotional again. This planet has like forgotten so much, and like forgotten miracles. This planet has forgotten like how true miracles happen. And it's like been the cult of balls mission to also like squash that and force people also into these like rigid like religious practices that also aren't surrender and aren't like true source connection. And so the cult of Baal has also like wanted humans to stop feeling and wanted humans to stop like surrendering to like their full selves into the fullness of source. And so I'm having a surrender moment. I'm having a surrender moment where I am feeling, like the grief about that. And that's part of it too, is like, oh God, okay, I'm feeling tension. I'm feeling something. I need to surrender to that. And I need to allow it. And I need to like let my system show me what that is teaching. Because everything has something to teach us, even the evil. And I just want to see this world surrender to their light you know, to surrender to like the absolute highest power that is real, that is not Baal, that is not the cult, that is not Satan. So I've felt grief, for humanity on this journey a lot, as I have remembered what's true and remembered the real mechanics and remembered also how these evil beings have like tried to invert, those teachings and have tried to like take, someone like Jesus's truth and spin it in a way that keeps humans subjugated rather than free. And I think, the whole point of like these avatars like coming to Earth and like demonstrating like what was demonstrated in that lifetime is also it's to like show humanity freedom. It's not to like show you something to pedestal or to like worship or to pray to. It's to show you what freedom looks like and what like true source surrender looks like. And to show what like the power of source can do when we operate in alignment with source and when we surrender, to the experience and the fullness of it. So again, it's like surrendering is not just like letting evil abuse you, like that's not it. It's different, and I'm pretty sure, that like Jesus's surrender on the cross, it wasn't about just surrendering to like take everyone's karma, like to take the sins of humanity and clear them. It was like a long-term surrender game. It was like a long-term understanding that like sometimes we do have to surrender to allow the victory to come later. That like also on this much longer like arc of history on earth, sometimes a sacrifice has to be made, to get to the other side and to allow, for the rebirth. And also Jesus knew about rebirth. He was actually resurrected. Like the resurrection is an actual thing. He went to India afterwards. He was healed. He rose. He did literally rise from the dead. Like some of the stories about that just being like uh, a vision, or like seeing the image of Jesus and it being like this fleeting thing. No, like that was another miracle that happened for that being. Because also, Source is the rebirth of life, Source is the miraculous resurrection of life. And and so Jesus also surrendered to that experience, knowing that like it wasn't the end, knowing that like he wasn't ultimately being subjugated to the evil because he was going to be resurrected both in that lifetime and then also like in the future, because life continues. Like, that's also like just a level of mastery that I think like people haven't fully understood, that like there's a way to like understand surrender on a much like larger level and on a much like bigger cycle. And to also, with that, like also recognize like the sacrifices, that have been made by a lot of beings and by a lot of humanity over time, so that we would have the chance at a miraculous resurrection for planet Earth, and so that we would have a chance at a liberation, a deliverance from evil. And so that that could happen on a level that prevents the worst case scenario, from occurring for a lot of souls, and that allows a lot of like miraculous transformation to occur. So it's my belief and understanding and knowing that, a lot of our understanding of the mechanics, the spiritual mechanics of Jesus have been part of the story. We haven't fully understood, like the bigger picture there. And I think it's also important for the world to know, like, Jesus was resurrected, like Jesus lived on. That was not the end. That was not the end. Like him and like the apostles, the women that were with him, they knew like yoga. They knew like shamanic healing. That's not in the Bible, like that stuff didn't get in the Bible. Like he studied in Egypt and India before performing miracles in Israel, like he knew the spiritual mechanics of the universe. He knew the spiritual mechanics of the miraculous. And he taught that to some of his closest followers. And so they were able to help him heal. He came back from the dead. So anything's possible. The miraculous is possible. Healing is possible. Like large scale miraculous transformation is possible. And I think we need to also recognize that and know that. And remember what surrender is truly about. And how, again, it's not about just like not taking action. It's not about just being a passive player in life. It's more about accessing highest source intelligence and your highest, intelligence, and not staying like entangled, with the negativity that likes to block that light and intelligence from coming through. So thank you for letting me get emotional here and surrender into that experience as I did this chat. I have a lot of love for humanity, and it's been a really long journey for humanity. Like the way my consciousness has tracked, like through the eras, all of the different aspects of this like grand drama that have been playing out between the dark and the light on this planet for so long. I feel deeply sometimes, for the journey of humanity and all of the experiences that have happened that have been so hard. And this is one of the beautiful things, about being human, is feeling. And again, when we operate in the light, when we do hold the intention to be a vessel of source, we have this full range, of like emotional possibility and experience that, again, the cult has attempted to like program out of us at times. So it's like we also have to be willing to really, really feel again, and with that, comes grief and so I think there's this also like misnomer at times about non-dual consciousness and like holding that 0 point consciousness and transcendent consciousness, that's like something you can do every moment of every day, and that's not the human experience. It's just not, like if you're engaging this world at all, it's just not, and it's important to remember that, and it's important to like feel and allow ourselves to surrender into that feeling experience of being human. And then as that surrender happens, boom, like the miracle shows up, the new possibility shows up, a new perception shows up, a new sense of peace shows up, whatever it is that is of the highest for us, that is part of either our blueprint or a gift from source for us, can show up. And so thank you for letting me demonstrate my experience of emotionality and surrendering to that. I feel a lot these days. I'm a deeply feeling person because of this work I've done to deprogram myself from that level of like suppression and desensitizing. Like humans have also been desensitized to a lot. And when we choose to open to like the full spectrum of perceptual ability as well, that requires the feeling mechanisms and the emotional range to come back online too. So I want to encourage that also for those who are on the awakening journey, is to really like welcome and set the intention to allow yourself to be a full spectrum emotional vessel, so that those emotions and feelings don't get trapped in you, and so that we can more easily surrender to those and let them pass through our system. Because when we can just surrender to that and just let it pass through the system, well, then we're back at the 0 point. So I think this is a good teaching about that, like in real time. Like after that last video I recorded, I was like feeling a little tension, and then I was having this thought about the Jesus examples, and I was like, yeah, like I think I need to say something about that. That's important. And then boom, this emotion, needed to come through me, and then now I'm back at a more 0 point place, a more like surrendered, focused place. So surrender to the full human experience and all of the ways that it feels, while also holding the intention to be in your highest aligned spiritual action. And ultimately, like, we always want that to be the highest, most loving action. And eliminating predators is loving. Like that's love. That's love for the children of Earth. That's love for the creation. And so, there's also a lot of ways that like the cult of Baal has wanted us to also feel like that would be wrong, that like eliminating them would be wrong. and to not want to surrender to that, so it's like we also have to just kind of constantly ask, like, okay, what am I in resistance to? What am I not surrendering to? What am I not wanting to feel? What am I not wanting to see? What am I not wanting to address? And that helps us ultimately like find that centered, balanced, focused samurai place where the highest potential and highest consciousness can move through us. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning back in. If you didn't see the previous video where I go a little deeper on the Anunnaki ancient control programs that have resurfaced in modern times and the cult of Baal, go check that out because that's some good context here as well. Okay, bye for now.